Hello, and thank you for joining today's informational webinar on the Rural Innovation Grant Program. Quick reminder that today's webinar will be recorded and posted on the website probably next week for the duration of the application period. Today, we are going to be talking about the timeline for the grant application, as well as the program overview, really highlighting a few of the changes that the Rural Innovation Grant has gone under for this new round. And then we're going to jump into the scoring rubric and application questions. You can kind of see how those application questions directly correlate to the scoring rubric. And finally, we'll wrap it up with an opportunity for questions. You will be able to either drop them into the chat or unmute yourselves. Please wait until the end to ask questions over a speaker. You are welcome to use the chat feature at any time. The Rural Innovation Grant is currently open and accepting applications on iowagrants.gov. The application deadline is September 1st, 11:59 p.m. for those procrastinators in the group. And the funding notification will be at the end of September. So quick turnaround for the review panels during that month. And then the funding period starts almost immediately, October 1st of 2022 through June 30th of 2024. For those that are familiar with the Rural Innovation Grant and some of the other Center for Rural Revitalization grant programs, we're really working on extending that funding period. That's why we have moved up the application period so that there is as long as possible for you to be able to complete those projects. So the Rural Innovation Grant was really kind of the first concept, idea, recommendation from the Governor's Empower Rural Iowa initiative back in one of their recommendations from 2019. So it aims to support those really creative, out-of-the-box solutions to rural challenges. And we kind of have them associated with the themes of investment, growth, and connection. Those are directly correlated to the three task forces within the Governor's Empower Rural Iowa initiative of connect, invest, and grow. But this year, we are really honing in on that concept of innovation. So if you look at the word innovate, it essentially means to improve or replace a process, product, or service. It's a creation of something new. That will be an eligibility requirement actually this round, whereas previously it was up to the interpretation of the panel on if something was innovative. But because we've added a couple other additional programs, we're really honing in on the Rural Innovation Grant being truly innovative, something that is very much a difference from something that's existing or something entirely new. Another change you may notice is that we have increased the grant award amount this year. So the minimum grant request is for $10,000, the maximum is $50,000. So our intent this year is for us to only have a couple awards. We're thinking 2 or 3. This will be a very competitive program, and that's where we're really getting at those innovative concepts, those really innovative projects that will kind of set a model for the rest of the state. The match has remained the same, so it's 1 to 1/2 cash secured match. So it does need to be secured by the time of application, not the time of the project. You need to prove or submit proof of that match in your application. And the 1/2, that is essentially if you are asking for the maximum grant request of $50,000, you need to have $25,000 in cash match. Comparatively, if you're asking for the minimum $10,000, you need $5,000 in cash match. Reminder that all the expenses need to be within the funding period. So that includes both the match and the grant request itself. If there is pieces of the project that happen before or after, there is an area, it's called supplemental project cost, that you can include the information in the application, but it does not count towards your match and it does not count towards your grant. This is a reimbursement grant program. So what that means is that you will need to pay upfront and then submit for reimbursement. You do not need to do one lump reimbursement, but you must be in increments of 500 per request. So and that does not include the match. So if you are asking for a disbursement of 500 from your grant, you need to also have in that same claim 250 for your match. So a total of 750 in documentation. This is all through Iowa grants. You will submit your claims as well as your application for Iowa grants. Your claims also need to include an invoice, so an explanation of what was purchased, proof of payment. This could be everything from a canceled check to a receipt to some kind of note that demonstrates that it was paid, and then a status report on how things are going. There are also reporting requirements. So there are quarterly reports as well as final reports. The first quarterly report for this grant cycle will be in January of 2023, and that will capture the time period from October through December. And then it will be every 3 months after that will be a required quarterly report. Those are fairly, casual or small reports. We don't really want those to be overly cumbersome. The goal really is a touch base to make sure that the project is on track, that you haven't hit any challenges, any roadblocks, you don't foresee needing to change the scope of your project. We just want to make sure we have a way to kind of routinely check in. The final report is a more formal report. We do expect that to be completed within 120 days of the project completion, whether your project takes it to the end of the contract period or if you complete it more quickly, we do expect that final report. It should have a summary of your project as well as any photos or documentation, newsletters, anything like that. And again, this is all through Iowa grants. Eligibility requirements. All of our grant programs through the Center for Rural Revitalization have the same population requirements. So that is that the project or program must exist in and benefit a city in Iowa with a population of 20,000 or fewer and not contiguous or sharing a common border, with a city that has a population of 40,000 or greater. Or in the case of a county-wide project, it must be one of the 88 least populous counties in Iowa. Then as far as applicants for this one, it is fairly broad. I would say as you look at this list, essentially, as long as it is not an individual, you are eligible to apply, must exist in Iowa. I also want to note that the applicant entity does not need to be in the rural, does not need to meet the rural population requirements. As long as the project or program is happening there, it is okay if the applicant is from a more urban area. Eligibility requirements. We really want you to think through this as you are thinking about your project and going through the application. We have made this an actual project checklist based on eligibility. So even before your application gets to the review panel, it will be reviewed internally for these items. That is to really make sure that we have innovative projects that are being reviewed, that the application is really in the correct category. So essentially, we want projects that are unique in their design or in their implementation. We also are still focused on the fact that they can be replicated in other rural communities. Looking for projects that have multiple partners. We don't want a project that has been implemented in another community. If that is your goal and your project, you should apply for the Rural Scale Up grant program, not to this one. The project will have a local impact beyond just the individual organization or business. And then it's a new solution to an existing challenge or a new application of an existing solution. So we're really looking for that innovative piece to be part of this. Again, if you feel like you may be fit, you're not so sure, please contact me offline or at the end of this webinar, and we can talk about those. Use of funds eligibility, it's very broad. Essentially, if the action is directly supporting a project or program that the grant was received for, it is an eligible expense, including personnel time, as long as there is good documentation on that the time was used for the project. So not just blanketly paid for someone's time. it's potentially more worthwhile to think about the ineligible use of funds. Specifically, we have had some attempts to receive grant funding for things that are related to fundraising or prizes and awards. Those things are not eligible expenses. They both are not eligible for the grant, and they are not eligible as match. They would fall into that supplemental category. So you can consider them part of the project. We are interested to know kind of the holistic cost, but it cannot count towards your match or your grant. Another kind of checklist, this one's a little bit more into the basics of the grant program, and most of it we've already gone over, but I do want to mention again that everything must be submitted through iowagrants.gov, and everything must be submitted by the application deadline. Anything submitted after that will not be able to be considered by the review panels. Also, while the applicant list is very long, we do want to make sure that the local government entity, whether that is a city or county, is aware of the project. So we do have a requirement for a letter of support or resolution from either the city council, a mayor, county board of supervisors, preferably a letter of support, but at a minimum, a letter of acknowledgement that they are aware that the project, that the applicant is applying for that project. This is just to really support kind of that partnership concept that everyone is kind of working towards these projects together. Also, the primary applicant can only submit one application per program through the Center for Rural Revitalization. They can, however, be listed as a partner on another application. So for example, if a city is the primary authorized applicant for an application to the Rural Innovation Grant, they can be listed as a partner in other Rural Innovation Grant applications. They just cannot be the primary. And I see that someone can't hear. Let me know if others can't. Otherwise, Susan hopefully will hear the recording after this. However, the same city that is a primary applicant for the Rural Innovation Grant is also able to submit another application to a different program. For example, the Rural Housing Assessment Grant Program. You can submit an application to multiple programs, just not multiple applications to a single program. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the application and the scoring rubric. So again, iowagrants.gov is where the application is held. The guidelines are available on our website, but all of the application and application support materials must be submitted through Iowa Grants. I'll mention here and I'll mention again later, if you do not have an iowagrants.gov account, I would highly recommend creating one. Even if you're not sure if you're going to apply, it's just helpful to have because it can take up to 72 hours to be approved. And it's best to not try to do that the day before the grant is due because that is actually done by an entity outside of my office. So keep that in mind if you do not yet have an Iowa Grants profile. The rubric for this program is on a scale of 65 points, but that does not include the 2 extra consideration categories. So for this program, the first extra consideration category is if the project has been endorsed by the Iowa Great Places Citizens Advisory Board. That is worth a total of 5 additional points. The Iowa Great Places is a designation program, so your city or region or area must be designated, but then on top of that, the project itself will need to have been endorsed. We work with the program manager to make sure that that is fulfilled. Also, projects that are located in a community of 5,000 or fewer receive an additional 5 points. Keep in mind that the scoring rubric we're going to discuss is all in the guidelines. So keep that rubric handy when you are developing your responses to the application questions. It can really help you to understand what the panelists are looking for. So the first section is actually an unscored section, but it's important to kind of provide that synopsis. If you are familiar with this program and have applied in the past, we have a small change to this section specifically. We found that there was some duplication. So here we actually decreased the character amount to only 500 characters. So this is intended to truly be a very brief summary, couple sentences to explain your project so that the panelists that are reviewing it are able to quickly understand what they are about to learn about. The first scored section is the project description. So describe the relevance of the project to the Empower Rural Iowa Initiative mission. That is the question you will see in the application. Character maximum there, I will list that through all of them. I believe all of them are 2,500 characters. And then finally, the scoring rubric is the mission alignment. Keep in mind that for the panelists, they are instructed to score based on a scale of 1 to 5. So this just gives them an idea of what type of response would receive 5 points, what type would receive 1, and they can make a determination based on that scale. Innovation. So this is a big one, and you'll see that this is actually out of 15 points rather than 5 points like the previous question. That's to really emphasize that this is a priority of the program this year. So we have adjusted our scoring rubric a bit. And here is the opportunity for the applicant to really talk about how this project is innovative and creative and going to address a challenge in a different way. Replication. This one's out of 5 points. This is actually a key piece that is part of the administrative rules of this program, is that ability to replicate a project across the state. So we really want these to be models. So this is an opportunity for the applicant to talk about how this angle or solution can be used by others. And kind of any plans that there might be to help guide other communities through that process. Implementation, this is again 5 points. Timeline of how you plan to complete your project. The more detailed your project description timeline is, the stronger your response will be and the more points you will receive. So while you may answer and just say, you know, the program will be completed on June 2023. Totally great. However, more steps would make for a stronger response. Evaluation. Here, we really encourage applicants to think about their evaluation of success in a couple different ways, both qualitative and quantitative. That can vary depending on the type of project that we're looking at, but really consider what the challenge is and how you will use this solution to measure success. So we want you to kind of think about that in a couple different ways. Weak responses will just say, and we will have addressed we'll say food hunger, and fine, but we really want you to talk about maybe there will be surveys, maybe there'll be a quantitative measurement of how you will be able to successfully analyze your project. So think about it in a couple different ways for this response. Public value. Kind of self-explanatory, but both of these questions are an opportunity for you to talk about how both your community locally as well as Iowa as a whole will potentially benefit from your project. Community partnerships. All of these projects really benefit from having multiple partners on board. We want you to include both those that are logistical, so planning partners, anyone else that you have worked with, even if it was to help do some research in the project development, include them. Also include a list of financial partners, so anyone who is providing any kind of match or in-kind, any of that can be included as well. There will be another location for you to include that match documentation in the budget section, but I would also encourage you to include it here because that really demonstrates that partnership piece. So having it in both of those places, while it might seem redundant, is easier on the panelists to review. So I would encourage you to put it in both spots. The budget is broken down into kind of 4 sections, with the total project cost at the bottom just being a combination of the 3. So the requested amount, that is what your grant request is. So a maximum of 50,000 would be there. The cash match, that has to be at a minimum half of the amount of your requested amount. So if you're asking for 50,000, it must be at least 25,000. However, if you have additional cash match, you can enter it in there. So say, for example, you had 30,000 instead of 25,000 to go with your $50,000 ask. Totally fine, put it there as long as it's all cash. If it is an in-kind, or if it is a project cost that is outside of the contract period, then it would be put under supplemental project costs. So that is essentially anything that can't count towards match and wouldn't count towards a grant. And then again, the total project cost will sum the all 3 categories. The second part of the budget is the source of matching funds and the use of funds. So the source of matching funds, you will actually be uploading documentation, proof of match. This can be everything from letters of match support from other organizations. It could be a resolution from the city. It could be a bank statement showing that the funds are available. Stronger applications will have local match and will have a variety of match. So panelists are looking for that real local buy-in. So if your city is providing some funding, if your local foundation, if there are individuals that have contributed, all of those will strengthen your score. But it is, I mean, it's not a requirement. So you also could have federal match dollars, or another state grant could also potentially be used as a match. So there is the opportunity to use those there. However, the stronger scores will go to those that have more of a local match. And then use of funds will simply be, it's a table line item. So you will state what the part of the project is and how many funds are going there. So you just list out the different pieces of that project. Oftentimes, applicants will also submit quotes, especially if it's a construction type project, quotes for how much a construction project will cost, or design type costs, things like that. You can submit that in your supplemental support material, and then you would just put that line item in the use of funds within your budget. The media support material, again, 2 sections. We have letters of support and support material. Letters of support, there are actually technically no required letters of support unless you are not a local government. If you are a local government, you're not required to submit any. We would recommend, but you're not required. If you are not a government entity, you do need to at least have that letter of support / acknowledgement from the local city or county that they are aware of the project. There's no, I'd say, maximum. Just combine the letters into one PDF and upload them as letters of support. Other support material, again, it depends on the type of project, but we have things like design images, photos, newsletter clippings. It kind of depends on what your initiative is, on what makes the most sense. But support material is also an option. And the final category that is scored is grantmanship and case for support. This one obviously does not have an associated application question, but is instead an opportunity for the panelists to think about the application as a whole, to think about the project as a whole, and provide additional points for those projects that really had a strong application, a good case for support that they are really excited to stand behind and provide state funds for. And that is the end of the application and the scoring rubric. Quick reminder that all of that information is in the guidelines that are on the website. And the application is again on iowagrants.gov and currently open. If you have questions at this time, you can either enter them into the chat if that's easier, or you are welcome to unmute yourself.
Hi, Liesl. I've got a question. One of the eligible project checklist items says the project has not been implemented in other communities in Iowa. Can you add some clarity to that one? I guess I'm confused how we would necessarily know if what we're talking about has or hasn't been replicated.
I mean, I guess it's a good question. I don't expect everyone to know everything, but for example, we put that in there because we had some applications to rural innovation grants in the past couple of years that actually referenced another community that had done a project, and so they wanted to do it too.
Okay.
So it's essentially a goal to not do that. And while that's fine, just that this is not the right program for that.
Okay.
So, I mean, we don't expect you to know everything. I think if you apply and it seems like it's innovative and we were not aware broadly that someone else has been doing it, then it would be fine.
Okay, thanks.
For those that are familiar with the Rural Innovation Grant, I just want to repeat probably the 2 or 3 big changes this year before we kind of shut things down. And if you have any more questions, just raise your hand or drop them in the chat. But first, that true focus on innovation. So to make sure that your project is new, it's not something that is being done elsewhere. Even if it's one of those things where it's like, oh, hey, well, it's just not being done in a small community. There might be another program that's a better fit for you there. Also, the increased funding for this one, so that 50,000 maximum grant award is a change this year. So kind of keep those 2 things in mind. And if you have questions about your specific project on which application might be best, more than happy to talk with you about those to either through email or phone. That is probably the easiest option to make sure you're in the right one. Okay, so we had a question about the innovation grant or the enrichment grant. So the rural enrichment grant program is also new this year, and it is pretty much a direct outcome of some of the applications we have received in the past for the rural innovation grant. Things like playgrounds and parks and streetscaping, even curb bump outs and murals, things that really can be impactful for communities, but are not necessarily innovative. They're things that just kind of provide that quality of life that is so wonderful in our small towns, but not necessarily super creative. So that's why we created the enrichment grant program, because we noticed that there really isn't a great state funding source for those type of kind of smaller scale quality of life programs, things that aren't necessarily a cat-sized grant, but really might need just a little bit more funding to help them get over that hump of actually being implemented. So that's the main difference between the 2. Innovation grants are actually kind of solving a challenge in a creative, unique way that has not been done before. Enrichment grants are those quality of life, small project grants. Any additional questions? Okay, well, this will be recorded and will be posted on the website for the duration of the application period. And if you have any other questions, you can email me or give me a call. Happy to help however I can, and looking forward to your applications. Have a great day, everyone.